this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football, so tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, and this episode 1112 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To me, fantasy football is about finding small edges that come together and add up to become a big edge. We look at certain metrics, we have a specific process, we do things to give us an edge over our competition. And one of those things, albeit not the most important thing in the world, is schedule analysis. It's looking at who our players might be facing because we know that matchups are not irrelevant. I do this episode every year on early season schedule analysis. Like I said, it's not the end all, but I focus on the early season stuff because number one, teams are healthy. We have some idea as to what defenses are going to look like. Whereas if we did this before the season, looking at like week 15 or 16, we might have some idea, but defenses are going to look a lot different personnel-wise because injuries happen and things change. But number two, we want to have confidence in the players that we draft, and we want to turn a profit immediately. If your first round pick has a tough early season schedule, and if he struggles, even if you know those matchups were tough, you're still going to have some doubts. You ideally want to win and win right away. Not only in the win-loss column, but you want your players to increase in value so you can feel more comfortable with what you have on your team. And in more active leagues, you can then trade them for a profit. So the idea with the analysis that I'm about to get to is that it shouldn't be the sole decision maker for you. But as a tiebreaker, as something to at least keep in mind as you draft players, knowing that you might need some backup if the player has a tough schedule, I think it can be useful for that. Actually, I know it can because it has in the past. Now, before getting into that analysis, just as a reminder, check out the Late Round Draft Guide. It's well over 270 pages of content where I go through game theory, I explain how to spot breakouts and busts, there's a section on players to target and avoid, there's cheat sheets, and so much more. You can order it right now on lateround.com, or you can become an all-access member. If you're an all-access member, you get access to not only the draft guide, but the prospect guide too, alongside all the member perks like Discord access, rankings and tiers, and more. You can learn more about everything again over on lateround.com. I've said before on the show that Malik Willis is the easiest pick to make in season-long leagues this year. Not necessarily best ball, but season-long, yes. Because if he's terrible, and we see that he's terrible, you can make a move and start streaming as your worst case scenario. Or you just draft Malik Willis and another quarterback this year to increase your odds with hitting on one of them. Maybe pair him with a more stable piece like Brock Purdy or something. Willis showed off some upside in a small sample in Green Bay, but this episode, it's not about digging into why you should be into him. I'm bringing him up because there's something a little extra to get excited about. Miami has a really favorable schedule to open up the season. Willis could actually get off to a hot start. Miami opens the season against the Raiders, then they get the 49ers, Chiefs, Vikings, Bengals, a bye week, and then the Jets. Now, I'll be referencing the secondary rankings on today's show from Sharp Football Analysis, just to have something objective to share with you guys. And according to those rankings, 5 of those 6 opponents ranked 23rd or worse in pass defense entering the year. The one team who ranks higher than that is Minnesota. Minnesota ranks 16th according to those rankings. That means Miami doesn't have a super tough opponent in terms of pass defense across their first 6 games. And we know Miami, they might lean run heavy. But like I said, in that stretch of games, they get the 49ers, the Chiefs, and the Bengals. Those are games where they might be forced to throw the ball a little bit more. We don't know what this pass catching room is going to look like for the Dolphins. But I do think that this should make you feel a little bit more comfortable in drafting Malik Willis this year. We know the upside is present, and there's not that much in the way in terms of schedule. Denver has a really tough schedule to open up the season. They get the Chiefs in week 1, then it's the Jags, the Rams, the 49ers, the Chargers, and then the Seahawks. That is absolutely brutal. 5 of those 6 teams have win totals above 10. I do think there's high scoring potential in some of those contests, but I think that we should be cognizant of the fact that Denver has a real shot to hit some negative game scripts through this stretch. And if that's the case, I'm looking at that backfield, and it makes me a little bit more fearful about J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins played fewer than 15% of the Broncos' long down and distance snaps last year, and he was on the field for fewer than 30% of the team's 2-minute snaps. Now, we don't know exactly how some of that work is going to be divided this year. There's a slightly different look to that backfield. But if the Broncos end up trailing in any of those games, I do think we run into the risk of Dobbins being game scripted out. Now, I personally have not been that high on Dobbins this year because if I'm grabbing an early down back, I'd rather just wait and get someone like Jordan Mason or maybe even Chris Rodriguez. They go a lot later on the major platforms. And this is another reason why I'm more out than in on Dobbins this year. I'm bullish on the Jags this year. I love that offense. But I do have to admit that facing Cleveland, Denver, and New England to kick off the year won't be the easiest thing for the passing offense to face. They get a slight break in week 4 against Cincinnati, but then it's Philly and Houston right after that. For context, Sharp Football has 5 of those first 6 opponents as having top 10 secondaries in football entering the season. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a death sentence for the team's passing attack, especially considering the Jags have team totals of 20 to 24.5 in each of those games according to DraftKings. With that being said, we're not getting the huge team total spikes that we've got for them post-bye. The first 6 games for the Jags have an average team total of 22.2. Their next 5 games are 24.6, so 2.5 points higher, which when it comes to probability, median outcomes, and team totals, that's not insignificant at all. So be aware of this as you're drafting Jags this year. It's not making me off of them. I still like the Jags passing attack. It's just that we might have an opportunity to buy after that week 7 bye. Jahmyr Gibbs is my 101 this year, and my goodness, the Lions could just smash in general this year offensively. Let me read the matchups for Detroit to start the year. Saints, Bills, Jets, Panthers, Cardinals, bye week. Not only are those 4 very winnable games where we could end up seeing positive game scripts, but that game against Buffalo has a chance to be high scoring too. Detroit's schedule, according to win totals, is actually the easiest in all of football this year, like across the season. And while we'd want more of a back and forth nature from a game script perspective, we know that implied team totals can at least give us some idea of how well an offense is going to perform. And Detroit doesn't have a single matchup where their implied team total right now today is under 24 points. They're the only team in football where that's the case. That's good news for everyone in that offense. But with this being about early season schedules, it doesn't get that much better for a player like Gibbs than the Saints, Bills, Jets, Panthers, and Cardinals. We may not see as much passing volume, but I'm expecting a great start for this Lions run game. The Chargers have a really interesting schedule this year. It's like a parabola. The first 2 weeks are great. They face the Cardinals and Raiders. Hello, Amari and Hampton. But then after that 2-week stretch, you get the Bills, Seahawks, Broncos, Chiefs, Rams, Texans, and Ravens. Brutal. After that, though, it's the Jets, Patriots, Bucks, Raiders, 49ers, Dolphins, and Chiefs. Some tougher matchups in there for sure, but it's not nearly as bad as that middle season stretch. So what does this all mean? Well, I don't think that you need to necessarily draft Chargers any differently than you already have been. But I do think that after week 2, we may have a sell opportunity if your fantasy team's like 0-2 with someone like Amari and Hampton, or even Justin Herbert. Just because that post-week 2 stretch is really tough. It's at least something to keep in mind if we're entering week 3 and we're saying, Amari and Hampton's a league winner. I wouldn't ignore who they were facing, though I do like Amari and Hampton this year. So the TLDR here, draft Chargers as you've been drafting them, be prepared for a lot of points in weeks 1 and 2, but then also be prepared for a potential decision after those weeks are over. Fortunately, we don't have to really worry about that right now. The Bills open up their season against the Texans, the Lions, the Chargers, the Patriots, and the Rams. That's really tough. Not only do we have some teams in there that could be tough defensively, but clearly all of those teams have pretty strong win totals. In fact, only Houston's below 10 wins. And they clearly have one of the best defenses in the game. The Bills are good themselves, so it doesn't mean that they're a lock to be in a bad game script. With that being said, if they do find themselves in that situation, James Cook becomes a little bit riskier. Largely because last year, including the playoffs, Cook played fewer than 10% of the Bills' long down and distance snaps, and he played fewer than 30% of their 2-minute snaps. Now, there have been reports of them using him more in the passing game this year, which would really push him into more elite fantasy football territory if that's the case. And he's already been awesome, because we typically see him under that 10% target share. That's going to give his profile a lot more stability. But do be aware that there's at least some chance for the Bills offense to not have the best rushing numbers over the first 5 weeks of the season. I don't think it's as big of a deal because the Bills themselves are good, like I said. And they can easily flip these scripts. We're not talking about a bad team with this kind of schedule. But it's something to keep in mind, specifically with James Cook. A very similar situation exists with the Arizona Cardinals. The Cards open their season against the Chargers, Seahawks, and 49ers. 3 teams with high win totals. And the Cardinals could very easily be the worst team in football. Now, Arizona's not the easiest team to figure out this year. They threw more than any other team last season. The defense still projects to be pretty bad, putting them in negative game scripts, but it's not always easy to project the same type of scripts year over year, especially when there's turnover. There's a new coaching staff, there's a brand new system. It's just not as simple as looking at last season numbers and converting them to this year. On top of that, the Cardinals spent their top 5 pick on Jeremiah Love. So they probably at least want to run the ball a little bit more year over year. But they could struggle to do that to start the year with these matchups. And what's specifically interesting about this dynamic, in my opinion, is the Tyler Algier-Jeremiah Love split to open up the season. I think we could all see a scenario where Arizona splits their backfield a little bit more at the beginning of the season compared to the end of the season, to get Love acclimated to the game and to ease him in. But the projection for this backfield is that Love's going to do more as a pass catcher than Tyler Algier. But what happens if they hit a negative game script early on in the season? Is this going to make Algier just not viable whatsoever? I think that's a reasonable question to ask if you're going to draft Tyler Algier this year in managed season-long leagues. I personally don't think it's a worthwhile bet when there are still players in his range who can naturally carve out pretty big roles in their offenses. And with the schedule being what it is to start the year, you're probably looking at him being a touchdown-dependent option. That's not what I want to bank on in a situation like this. But if those negative game scripts do hit, which I would imagine they do given this schedule, we could see the Cardinals kick off the year with a lot of passing volume. And to be honest, Arizona might still see a lot of passing volume this year because through the lens of win totals, no team has a harder schedule than Arizona this season. Now look, I do expect some regression on the passing front. Like despite the fact that the schedule is really hard. And the chaos of potentially using Carson Beck at some point this year, later in the season probably, that's also scary for the pass catchers in this offense. But projection-wise, they still look like a team with okay passing volume. Just be aware those first 3 weeks could be pretty tough for them before that Giants game in week 4. The Ravens have high implied team totals throughout the season. That's no surprise, Lamar Jackson's their quarterback. And while we usually get excited for Derrick Henry towards the end of the season, when he always seems to come through, there's a very, very real chance that we get great game scripts for Baltimore and Derrick Henry to start the year. Henry rarely plays long down and distance snaps and 2-minute snaps. Last year, those numbers were just 12% and 10% according to Fantasy Life data. We know this. It's why his route share is only in that 30 to 35% range. He's just a totally different type of running back, a totally different type of player. He's an outlier. He defies all pass catching trends. But that might not matter to start the year. Listen to this Ravens schedule. Week 1 against Indianapolis. Okay, not necessarily the easiest matchup on earth, but Baltimore's a road favorite. Then it's the Saints in Baltimore, the Cowboys, Titans, Falcons, Browns, Bengals. We're looking at great matchups for Derrick Henry and positive game scripts littered throughout that stretch. I'd anticipate that whole offense getting off to a strong start. But Henry, he could be the one who benefits most. Lastly, since we're talking about schedule analysis here, I want to throw out some potential defensive streaming options to kick off your season, to target in your drafts. The Chargers should be your go-to. They get Arizona in week 1, and then they get Vegas in week 2. It doesn't get much better than that. There really aren't many other teams with totally clean week 1 and 2 matchups. Green Bay gets Minnesota, probably Kyler Murray in week 1, but that's still more of like a whatever type of matchup. It's in Minnesota. Just know that Green Bay in week 2, they get the Jets. But outside the Chargers, if you're looking for a defensive streamer for weeks 1 and 2, for me, it's probably Philadelphia. They get Washington in week 1 and then Tennessee in week 2. And if you're only looking at week 1, the Jags are 7.5-point favorites against Cleveland, and it's in Jacksonville. So that's my week 1 streaming choice in a game with just a 40.5-point total. But that's it. Like I said, the early season schedule analysis is not the end all, but it definitely can be used to help settle tiebreakers. And to be honest, it can be used to help us understand what narratives might be floating out there once we're in the thick of it. And once these teams have played a few games, we have to find as many edges as we can, and schedule analysis, it's one of those edges. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. We got Becoming a Best Ball Bro later in the week. We got the Late Round Fantasy Football Show later in the week. And then at the end of the week, you get a mailbag episode. I'll catch you guys soon.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.